Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is you're tuning in. Thank you for stopping by the Martell Group Fireside Chat, where each week we sit down with an expert to go over the ever-changing landscape we all know as sales and marketing. This week we sit down with our guest Oren Chervinsky, principal of 113 Growth Strategies and an all-around expert in partnerships. Have a listen.
I live in a world of relationships. Everything that we work on is about building relationships. I treat every relationship in my life, from personal to business, like a bank account. You make deposits and you make withdrawals. You just need to be careful not to stay in overdraft very long. Being aware of where your balance, so to speak, is in all the relationships is super key.
Partnerships are an absolute cornerstone to the sales process. So without further ado, let's jump right into the conversation. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Fireside Chat. I'm joined here by Oren Chervinsky. Oren is the principal at 113 Growth Strategies, a super awesome guy, and if I might add, has a really nice beard. So you got to take that when you can get it, right? Oren, how are you doing today?
Great. Now that you've talked about my beard, I feel whole again.
The vibes are just high. We're just
I love it. Love it.
We're good to go. So, Oren, appreciate you being here. Appreciate you, being a part of the conversation and everything like that. I hope that we can get a chance to really dive in. Not only get to hear your background, a little bit more about 113, but also kind of like what makes you tick, right? And what sort of things, get you excited about the world of sales and marketing and all this other sort of stuff. So, before we get too far down the road, right? If you wouldn't mind, give just like a quick introduction. That way, everybody kind of knows who they get an opportunity to hear from today.
As Chris said, I'm at 113 Growth Strategies. I spent about 15 years in telecom, a good chunk of that in wholesale telecom around the world. Moved into software and BI in particular with my own company. Sold that, moved out west, spent some time in IoT and eSIM. That company then got sold, came back, and I've been working with small to medium companies on strategy, partnership, and top line revenue growth ever since, all under the 113 banner. That's it, I guess.
So it sounds like 113 is, you're doing a lot of work under that main banner right now, under that name. And you already kind of mentioned it, right? It's about partnerships. It's about scaling top line revenue, things of that nature. Talk to me about 113 in itself, right? Is that the main principles that you have in the reason that 113 exists, or is there a little bit more to that?
So 113 and the name, I think, says it all. But the name comes from 1 + 1 = 3, and the notion of finding synergy in partnerships. Mm-hmm. So at the highest level, I strongly hold and believe that large multinational corporations can learn a ton from small, nimble companies, and small, nimble companies can use the resources very effectively that some of these large MNCs have. So 113 started as sort of I don't want to say a platform, but a place where I could marry up small startup, early stage companies with some large MNC partners. And we worked on, channel partnerships, technology partnerships, revenue sort of partnerships, all sorts of different models. But the idea was always to give the larger company a cutting edge advantage while giving the smaller company some scale, some fuel for growth, and a market they may not have had access to earlier. So from there, 113 sort of branched it out into a variety of consulting and advisory roles in sort of corporate structure, sales strategies, marketing strategies for some of these companies, but always with sort of an eye to an exit or at least a leveling up plan. Mm-hmm. And sort of crafting the go-to-market strategy and the exit to be sort of synergistic and dovetail into each other, making sure you have the right kind of investors for the right kind of strategy that you have, and lining all that up for your exit or next level up plan is what I've been doing, I guess, through 113, and that's what it's for. So, yeah.
Gotcha. So there's kind of like seems like a full package type thing, right? Where you're working on both ends of the spectrum in terms of, larger size companies, smaller size companies, but really the goal, at least from what I'm understanding, the goal is to give them a pathway in a
Right.
sense, right? Give them a pathway from being a startup at their very first, funding that they get, things of that nature, to either scaling along a certain degree or having some type of exit point along the road. Is that right?
Right. Right.
Okay.
And a lot of it comes from my telecom background. I spent a lot of years working with LG and Samsung and Apple and Google and all the sort of big tech companies that, aside from their mobile components, have a variety of other sort of technology fronts that companies can veer into, be it healthcare, EMRs, EHRs, all the sort of hospital optimization, all of that. There's tons of opportunity in the startup world, and these large tech companies are the ones driving that as well. So we find a marriage for those two together, and it works for everyone.
What would you say is the balance that you have between that? Because I would imagine there's got to be some sort of balance in there between, where you put your priorities, who gets a little bit more attention, how you integrate these strategies into how you're growing one in terms of partnerships with the other. Is there like a difference in weight? Is it 50-50? What would you say?
It's a really good question. If I'm being honest, I think my bias is towards the larger MNCs, mostly because they're the ones that can keep coming back, and you don't want them to feel, if something doesn't work out, you don't want them to feel like they've lost too much so that they never try again, right? There's a lot of technology and business processes, all these things that we work in the startup world that may not fly for a variety of reasons, right? Market, technology, whatever. But we want to encourage these large companies to take a chance on these smaller companies and roll the dice, give them an incubator, not per se, but give them the space to grow.
Sure.
And be willing to take some risk. And I think in order to foster that kind of relationship, they need to be weighted a little bit heavier. But, I suppose reasonable people could probably disagree about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So then what would you say, kind of jumping around just a tad bit here, just to set the landscape, right? So you've got the bigger companies are what they are. I would assume, right? The bigger companies have been titans. You mentioned like your LGs or your Samsungs or whatever larger corporate partners, like they're probably not going to move as fast as a smaller company, right? So what would you say then would be the ideal profile of a smaller company that you would be interested in working with? Is there like a set certain space that they're in, or a set certain growth size? Like, how does that look for you guys?
Yeah. So and I think the answer is very sector dependent.
Sure.
For us, and I don't even know if it's by design or just sort of happenstance, really focus on healthcare and telecom, and a little bit of public sector stuff, but those are healthcare and telecom are really the primary sort of verticals that we work in. And in those spaces, two things are really sort of key. One is IP ownership, and the other is, that's a big, that's a big bucket. IP ownership and protection, and how you structure it, where is it, all that sort of stuff. But line of sight to revenue. And so there are any number of incredibly great companies and great ideas and great patents that have not the slightest inkling of how they can make money out of it. And if you can't figure it out, then I'm not sure I want to ask somebody else to try. So not to say things don't change, not to say that you don't, veer a different way or pivot or whatever. But if your business plan doesn't have a fairly solid line of sight to revenue. You know what needs to happen to get that first dollar in. You know where the 100th dollar is going to come from. All that sort of stuff needs to be laid out in advance of sort of approaching anybody, frankly. And when I talk to these companies, I know a lot of them from my telecom days, but many, if not all of them, have venture groups, inside there, and incubator type groups set up for it. The telcos in Canada are a great example. Most of them have a ventures arm. TELUS has a healthcare arm. Rogers obviously has the sports piece. Like, there's all kinds of different areas.
So then it sounds like too, and this may be a little bit of me assuming, so please correct me if I'm wrong here. It sounds like there's growth plans that you put in place, right? And we're trying to find the next, like you said, the next $100, the next
Right.
X number of dollars, whatever it is. I would imagine that there's a balance between the innovation and the growth, right? Or is there, right? Do you think that those two go in hand? Do you think that there's a time and place for just focusing on growth and like staying with a very rigid structure, or is there more time to be like, innovative, say nothing's off the table? How does that look for you guys when you're building these plans or building these connections with people?
I think for me, a lot of it is making sure that sort of you're trying to make a bridge between this large corporate, behemoth and a small 10-man company. I don't think you can take it there too early.
Okay.
So I advise a lot of companies. There's a lot of companies that we work with that have a great idea or great product that aren't mature enough yet to go and approach some of these larger companies. And the same is true for investment money, but for different reasons. In any event, the reason it doesn't make sense is these companies have a list of options of projects to take on. You're not the only thing in front of them. So it's not about getting them to say, well, you have a great idea here. You have to have a great idea that's going to impact them early enough and high enough on their priority list to cut the line of other projects and companies and initiatives that they have, 50,000 people working on. So, Samsung wants to invest $10 million. There's a lot of people who want that $10 million.
Sure.
So if you think you should get it, your table stakes is to have a good idea. Table stakes is, this could be a big deal. Mm-hmm. What I need is for somebody to have thought through the why won't it work, and what do you need to get over that, and bring that to us, and then we can work through how to get you there. But it can't be that you need me to figure out me being Samsung or whomever, you can't need me to figure out your survival strategy. If that's what I'm here for, that's not my job. And so that's I think the balance, to answer your question, the balance between innovation and growth depends where you are on that maturity scale, if you will, right? So
gotcha.
If you reach that maturity point where your product and your plan is relatively established, sure, go ahead and innovate some more and branch out and whatnot. But otherwise, I'd suggest focus on maturing what you have and building a plan for that. Don't boil the ocean.
What would you say then? I'm sure that this is just like you said, this is industry specific or very like vertical dependent, but is there a timeline for when that sort of shift ends up happening? Is it like, do you identify it as a certain point along the growth like journey, I guess you could call it? Or is it like saying, okay, we're going to do this for 6 months and then we can kind of accelerate? How does that typically happen?
For me, the two check boxes I'm trying to hit are IP protection and line of sight to growth. So do you have that? Do you have a product that it can be protected, that you have, and there's a list of questions that goes on from there, but is that portfolio intact? And how long will it take me to make my money back? If you can reach that maturity level, those are my check boxes. Then I think we're ready. Then I think you can go to one of these companies and say, all right, you don't like, here's what you've got. If you don't like it, we're still protected with our IP. We know where our money's going to come from otherwise. You don't want to come off there as needing them so badly that, your survival depends on it.
Yeah.
And that's again, it's more of a feel, I think, than it is a rule. But having sat in in that room a lot, you sort of get a sense for what people are looking for.
And I'm sure that comes with it, with experience too, right? In dealing with small or large entities, right?
Yeah.
Conversing with different people, just like you said, you're going to get different answers. So outside of the growth, and kind of creating the strategies for both entities, right? Whether it's a growth strategy to scale, whether it's a growth strategy to exit. Besides that growth, what are the advantages to going down a pathway like this? Like, are there other advantages that you find in terms of like, economic or just like technological advancement? Like, where does that come from?
This is going to sound cynical, so I'm sorry for that in advance. But most startups won't be Facebook, right? Most of these companies aren't going to be Twitter or whatever, Uber, Airbnb. Pick your big name. Partnerships offers more than just a path forward. It offers you a bit of a safety net. If you do it right, you have a partner that can save you later if you need them, if they need to. And if you build the relationship in a non-transactional manner, where you're both winning, you're both growing together, then I find you'll have more options always, as opposed to going at it alone. There are definitely challenges to working with large, Fortune 500 companies. They're very rigid. It takes them a lot of time to make decisions and to do anything about those decisions. So you have to balance that out with the benefit of it. And again, it depends on the product and on the plan that you have. It may not make sense if you need to be in market in the next 3 weeks because your invention will be stale after that. Then nobody's going to get you there.
Yeah.
You got to do it on your own. But otherwise, I find partnerships offers more opportunity than it does hindrances.
Now, to think more on like the corporate side of that, right? Yeah. Because I'm somewhat used to the corporate side. I'm sure a lot of listeners out there are. You are, right? Like the larger an entity gets, the more let's call it red tape and challenges that you have, right? I'm sure that there's more that you have to navigate through and whatnot. What advice would you give to navigate that red tape? Part of it's probably in some of the partnerships that you just talked about, right? In forming those partnerships, but what else would you advise to somebody who is looking to navigate that maybe on their own, or advise to, someone who's looking to at least understand what that structure looks like?
So a few things that, just based on my experience, if I had known earlier, would have saved me, a boatload of time.
Of course.
Right. But number one, know who your decision makers are. Know who's involved in the chain of command that you need to get sign off from. Don't wait for the product manager that you just met to, bring you a check for $20 million. That's not going to happen. So understanding that there are levels to these things, you need to be able to sell your product up. You need to be able to find the value in it for everybody at every level. And that means that, if your entry point into one of these corporations is because a product manager or somebody, in the rank and file, then understand how your product or your idea impacts their day-to-day. Take that, work on how that impacts the strategic objectives of their boss. And the answer can't just be savings. Everybody says they're saving you time. Everyone's saving, if you do it our way, you're going to save $30 million. You're not going to, that's going to be a very, very, very tough road to hoe. You want to have a value accretion, right? You want to be either adding, customer satisfaction or dollars and cents somehow, but something that you can measure that is above and beyond where they were before. Savings never holds water for long. Always one budget cycle. So once you've saved me my money, now what?
I would imagine that there's a lot of data that's involved besides just the money stuff, right? Is there a lot of like data pulling that you work with like let's say your partners on, right? Your clients on, are you working with them to try and pull a lot of data to say, okay, where else besides the money? Like take that off the table. Where else are we making a competitive advantage here?
Right. And I mean, a lot of that should be coming from the smaller company, right? From the startup. Again, you shouldn't be in that room unless you know the answers to these questions, right? You're not actually asking them to think about how you provide value. You need to be in there saying, this is how I'm going to, add value to your company. And it is worth this much. So it's worth this much of your time, or whatever it is. I don't know I don't know how much data there is, to be honest. I think it depends on what you're selling and what you're pitching to these guys. Your value proposition has to be simple and clear, which aren't the same thing.
So we've already kind of talked about, saying, hey, you have to identify the right person. We have to start, at least
Right.
like find somebody in the rank and file and either work our way up, make the value proposition, things of that nature. How are you going through the process of navigating that conversation once like an initial kind of connection is made, right?
Well, so the way 113 works is we think of everything as a funnel, right? So we
Sure.
have standing relationships with a lot of the companies I mentioned earlier. Several of the telcos in Canada, some of the hospitals. We have lots of sort of large corporate partnerships. And what we do is we evaluate companies coming in, whether they fit into this portfolio or that, where they might add value based on what the founders think and what we think, right? Like part of the conversation we'd like to think is we add value to your thinking about your company, right? So we have lots of small companies come in. They think this is the value they add, but it's actually much broader, right? And AI is a really good example of sort of how that's blown up, where you think you're just doing one thing, but really there's value coming in from other areas. So understanding that, we've established relationships in advance with the venture groups and the incubator sides of all of these large companies and have regular cadence where we talk about what's coming through our funnel, if you will. That's how we navigate these conversations, but that's taken 10 years to establish.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's how we start these. The companies come to the table with relatively open minds, knowing that we've had some success before.
I'm genuinely curious. Have you ever run into a scenario where, a startup has approached you, they want to work with you, you want to build a plan, and they are so set in understanding that their product or service does this, only to find out that the advantages or benefits all the time?
All the time. I at one point had thoughts of writing a book about how to work with founders. But founders are an interesting breed. They have a balance of delusion and, optimism that's tough to sort of manufacture if you just sort of don't have it. Like you got to be a little bit crazy to want to go start your own thing and think that you're going to grow it and take over the world or whatever. There's, maybe the word is arrogant. I don't know, but something. Very often, a company will come in and say, this is what we want to do. We want you to help us do it. But that might not be what I think I can do with you. The nature of the relationships we have, I know what my larger partners are looking for. You may not fit into that. And so we may need to change it a little bit. And that rubs people the wrong way. Sometimes when you're coaching people on how to have a conversation, they'll swear emphatically that the way they talk about it is the way to talk about it. But again, there's years in boardrooms that you may not have experience with to know that this is what people are actually looking for. And, the other thing I'd say, founders expect everybody to eat, live, breathe, sleep their passion.
That's a good point.
Corporate folks don't. They don't eat, live, breathe, sleep it at all. I mean, even the best of them, want to get away from it when they can. So you really need to put yourself in those shoes, in, a hostile witness, if you will. Like these people are looking to do a deal, but they're not, going to strain themselves. It's got to be easy. You've got to think about how you make their lives easy, not how they're going to help you or how the company's going to become super important, later on. How are you going to help them? And I think that's all key to it.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure that there's a balance even there. You kind of have to, I don't want to say tiptoe around, because sometimes founders may need it a little bit more bluntly than others, right? But you probably still have to almost tiptoe around that kind of conversation and just say like, hey, listen, we've taken an evaluation of this, we've looked at this and found that this is great for what you think it does, but we see way more here, and it'll unlock probably way more opportunities for partnerships with X, Y, and Z companies.
Right. And that may require a little bit more work or a little bit more time or a little bit more thinking or whatnot. But, we're not there yet, but let's go on that journey. Not everyone's ready to take that step.
Yeah. Yeah. And it kind of ties back to the point that you mentioned earlier, right? Where not everyone has the same timeline. This fits into that, where this may delay your timeline or it may speed it up depending on how fast you work. Oren, let's say you're speaking on a panel in front of 100 different people who have startup ideas. Maybe they have funding, maybe they don't have funding. What would be the most important things you would advise them to invest in off the bat, or the first couple steps you'd advise them to take maybe before they even got to you or 113?
And I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but a little bit of IP protection.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can't think of how to protect your idea or your business, then you need to assume that other people are going to come and do it very, very quickly after, which isn't necessarily a problem. Well, it's always a problem, but it isn't necessarily the end of the world, but it requires a very different sort of tack. If you come into a conversation with a patent or some trademarks or something, doesn't be complete, but something that demonstrates that you own this, that's very important. You probably need to do your first round of funding is friends and family. Don't go looking for anybody else, like that you don't know, a partnership or someone like me or an investor, to give you $1 million before you've put in your own sweat equity, your own money, and gone to your family and asked them. Because if you won't ask your friends and family for it, then you don't believe in it enough. And their money is going to be a lot cheaper than my money or any of my investors' money.
Yeah.
So self-fund for as far as you can without over-leveraging yourself.
I'm kind of genuinely curious at this. Do you have a favorite project? Is there anything that you're willing to share that you can talk about where you're like, hey, we hit the nail on the head with this one. It was the right startup. It was the right larger entity. Like we just hit this one out of the park.
Yeah. So, I'm going to refrain from mentioning any names.
I understand.
But we did work with a company that was very much focused on helping blind people and sort of had a very humanitarian cause. We opened doors to Google and Samsung and sort of helped that platform develop to a place where it adds layers of new value to those people using these technologies. So, that was a really good one. There have been a bunch of really satisfying exits to, some of the larger MNCs, which is always a nice thing to see. The founder gets a good executive level job. They can still run their stuff under the bigger umbrella, and the company gets to take advantage of, all this effort that we've all gone through.
I find, at least for myself, right, the projects that seem to either like hit home with you, either something personally or something that is just, we kind of mentioned it earlier, right, has a benefit beyond just the growth or just the exit strategy, right? You see like the humanitarian effort behind it, or you see where technology can benefit a number of different people or a group of different people, just kind of depending on what it ends up serving or what it ends up doing. Well, I know we're kind of coming up on time here, at least the recording time that we have, and I want to make sure that we're kind of respectful of that. We're kind of keeping the conversation a little bit shorter here. Again, for anybody who's tuning in, I'm sitting here with Oren from 113, just getting a little bit of a light deep dive, if you will, a shallow end dive into a little bit about what Oren does and what he looks for and things of that nature. If you don't mind, I'd like to give you the floor. We already kind of talked about the things that you'd advise of people, so on and so forth, but any sort of just like general advice that you'd give to somebody who's either entering this space or just like looking at sales and marketing in general. Do you have something that you'd advise of everyone?
Yeah. And I don't even know if this is advice that is new to people, but I live in a world of relationships. Everything that we work on is about building relationships. And two things really sort of come to mind for me there. One is, in any partnership, both parties need to win. You cannot leave your partner with nothing. That's not a negotiation. That's just, that's awful. That's just assault. Yeah. What you need to do is make sure you both win, and that's the only way that you have a partner that keeps coming back. So, number one, I treat every relationship in my life, from personal to business, like a bank account. You make deposits and you make withdrawals. You just need to be careful not to stay in overdraft very long. And being aware of where your balance, so to speak, is in all the relationships is super key. You're going to ask your partners to do you favors. You need to do the same for them. You need to scratch each other's backs. And I think it's important to keep track of that stuff.
It sounds like partnerships is a key aspect to anyone's success, I would probably say, right? Anyone's sort of success, the partnerships you create, and partnerships can mean anything, just about anything to everybody, but you're talking about relationships that you have with friends, or, relationships that you have in the corporate world or in the business world, or, in any sort of professional act that you do, right? Having that sort of personal relationship or partnership with somebody can really help make or break whatever your ideas are, whatever your opportunities are as you create them.
And handshakes matter. They matter, and they should matter. So when you shake someone's hand, you should mean it, and you should expect them to mean it too.
I love that. Well, I think that's kind of a good way to sign off here. Those are some really good last words, and I appreciate the comparison between saying that it's a bank account. I had never exactly pictured it that way, but it makes total sense. Like once you hear it out loud, and hopefully it's the same for the listeners in here. So, Oren, I really appreciate the time today. I know it was very brief. A lot of these fireside chats are kept that way, But honestly, I would love to sometime in the future maybe pick this conversation back up and even go a little bit deeper, right? Be able to have kind of like a further conversation with you, learn a little bit more. Maybe there's some new projects that you can let us in on without giving away too many details. We don't want to do that.
I'd be happy to anytime.
Oren, thank you so much for joining us today. Hope you have a good rest of your day and a good weekend, and we'll look forward to the next conversation.
Keep well.
Appreciate you. Shout out once again to Oren for joining us on this fireside chat. I believe he drove home some great points regarding partnerships and what they mean within the sales process. If you have a favorite part that you enjoyed, feel free to leave a comment down below and let us know your thoughts on this chat with Oren. Be sure to like the video, consider hitting the subscribe button, and turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when future chats go live on our channel. Thanks for listening, and as always, happy hunting.